Welcome back. So let's get into this discussion now. So Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Gayton Mckenzie is facing a backlash over his department's job advert that excludes black candidates. The minister has, however, hit back at critics, saying he's ensuring that all race groups are represented as per the Employment Equity Act. Well, now to help us unpack this, we are joined by Labour expert Galeboe Modisapodi. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Modisapodi. An absolute pleasure having you on the show. Such an interesting, I suppose, post that we see being advertised here. So it's an ad for the post of Deputy Director of Administrative Support and Coordination in Minister Mckenzie's department. And in the ad, it states a preference for coloured males, Indian males, white males, coloured females, and Indian females. I mean, I'm sure you can see the exclusion there, of course, being black males, black females. I mean, just upon hearing about this development or this post, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, the initial thought is that the minister is doing one of two things. Either he's committing a legal boo-boo, or he's basically gerrymandering, because the Employment Equity Act is very clear that affirmative action is the purpose is for the benefit of the designated groups. And I don't know if there's any way that you can argue legally that white males are designated if you look at the provisions of the Employment Equity Act. I think the approach that the minister is following is not sound legally. Politically, it may be argued correct. That's what I'm saying. It's either gerrymandering or it's a legal boo-boo, because he could achieve the same objective by just stating that preference will be for the designated group. But in the appointment process, there's nothing that precludes the minister or the selection committee, for example, for not appointing African males if they are overrepresented at a specific level. So the matter he's dealing with is effectively a management issue related to the final appointment decision. It's got nothing to do with falling within the four walls of the Employment Equity Act. Okay,
and we'll get into the legalities of it, but let's talk about what publicly this stirs up as a conversation. He, of course, takes to Twitter to defend the preference that has been stated in the advertisement of this post. And we're going to bring up that tweet in a moment so that you're able to see it for the viewer. He goes on to X. It's not called Twitter anymore, is it? He goes on to X and he says, "I can never lead a department that is so unrepresentative of society. I'm being accused of racism by people who really need to look in the mirror. Out of 586 total staff at the department, 531 are African, 19 are coloured, 4 are Indian, 32 are white." And so, I mean, that's an interesting point that he raises there, Mr. Modisapodi, because essentially he says, you've got 500 black people that are working at the department and everybody else, these tiny sort of numbers. Could that work legally as an argument? And then even if it doesn't work as a legal argument, does it, though, make a strong point around representation in the workplace?
Well, he can't make a legal argument to justify his case, because the first problem that, he's got two legal problems. The first one is that whites are not the designated group. It's a simple, straightforward matter. The second one is that the case law and all the way up to the Constitutional Court has said very clearly, even in expressing your preference for the designated group, you cannot impose an absolute barrier on the other groups, because then that violates Section 6, which relates to unfair discrimination. So if there's an absolute barrier, then it becomes an issue for unfair discrimination. So the absolute exclusion of Africans in this regard is not legally sound. I think that's the one issue from a legal point of view. Those two legal boo-boos. I think from a management perspective, there is absolutely no need for him to say in those specific terms in an advert, we want Indian males, white males, etc. If the Africans are, in his view, overrepresented in the grouping, that's a management issue to deal with when you're making appointment decision. And there's nothing that precludes him from not appointing Africans if they are overrepresented in that specific category. But to specify it in an advert is an absolute barrier, which is not what's permitted by the affirmative action provisions and the case law that has been decided on the matter.
Okay. What happens now? I mean, there's the political discussion, which is a much bigger discussion, but you talk about, legally this post simply not being sound. I suppose the question I'm asking is, can this land the minister or some of his officials in hot water, and to what extent, right?
Well, politically, I think he's already in trouble with organized labor calling for his removal. Depending on the momentum of that, it may take a particular direction. But legally, for example, if he were to proceed with appointment decisions based on the advert itself, because if you look at the advert itself, it presupposes that there may be an instance where there's a white male that's appointed that may not be sufficiently qualified. So a sufficiently qualified African may make a case to say, I understand your preference for specific groups, but I have two issues. The first issue is that the preference you've expressed does not comply with the provision for designated groups. That's the first issue. The second issue is that you have appointed in this instance a white male, which you stated very clearly in your preference, but that white male over and above being a non-designated, they are not qualified, so I'm more qualified than that person relative to the requirements of the job, in which case the minister then may then likely be ordered by the court to, in fact, the appointment may be declared null and void on that basis. So the consequences will depend on how far it goes legally, but politically, I think the train has left the station already.
Interesting. Well, you do have unions such as Chiusa that have asked for him to be removed. Thank you so much for speaking to us, an interesting perspective. And of course, for the benefit of our viewer, we have reached out to the Minister Gayton Mckenzie, inviting him to engage us on this discussion, and did not receive a response back. But thank you so much to our guest, Galeboe Modisapodi, who is, of course, a labor expert, speaking to us this evening.